Joining us. Since we only have 50 minutes, I am going to start us because we're very short on time. So you see the agenda in the chat box, and I will put it there again for those who, so you're just going to see it a couple times. I'll wait a few more minutes. We can do it again. But so let me just start by introducing myself, which is I am Elizabeth Cohn in the email system at AU. I go by Betsy. I'm a professor in the School of International Service. I'm also the SAS faculty coordinator for teaching and student learning. I do a lot of workshops for SIS and for CTRL on pedagogy. And Lacey, who is my co-facilitator, you are?
So I'm Lacey Wooten. I am the director of the Writing Studies program in CAS. And I'm actually doing a research study right now on emotional labor and writing instruction that I'll talk about a little bit more in a little bit. So that's part of the reason for my participation here. But in the writing program, we focus on pedagogy quite a bit too. That's really one of our central concerns.
All right. So just to set some expectations for today, we will be using the chat box a lot during this workshop, so you should check it. Our agenda and our learning outcomes are there, as I said. I'm going to have to put it in there more than once because the person, for example, who just entered the room would not have access to or to see it. I want you to know we're not going to be using PowerPoint today. I don't know if that pleases anybody else besides me. But it means we get to see each other. So if you feel comfortable, please turn your camera on and turn it off as necessary when you need to take a break or do something. So about half our time is going to be spent in breakout rooms. And we have some wonderful faculty facilitators who were registered for this session that we asked to be facilitators. And so they are going to facilitate 7 different groups. And we'll tell you more about that when we get there. So, but the first thing that's most important is for you to sign up for one of those groups. And the sign up sheet is in the chat box. So if you click on that link to a Google Doc, you should be able to choose one of the 7 groups. The first one is for staff only, because we figured they have a different context. And 2 through 7 are for faculty.
And I just posted it again at the bottom of the text there for those people who came in after Betsy had posted it earlier. So everybody should have access to it.
So we recognize there will be some overlap in those topics, but that's fine. We just wanted to have small enough groups so people could actually have a chance to speak with one another. So I'm going to make some opening remarks, and you should just, sign up for the breakout room while I'm speaking. I just want to talk to you why I organized this, proposed this workshop in the first place. And basically, I didn't want to teach online. I really hated the idea of teaching online. I cried. I literally cried. I drove to AU in mid-March when we went online, and I sobbed as soon as I saw the SIS building. So I love the physicality of the room. I love walking around, getting to know my students, looking over their shoulders in small groups, feeding off them. I read them. I can see where I'm losing them. And it's like, okay, pause to reflect. What's going on here? I step back. I let them take charge. I've literally sat on the floor so they stop looking to me in a discussion so that they just start calling on each other. And so I work up a sweat, running up and back. I fill up the whiteboards at the front of the room. And now we're on Zoom. And I was like, I can't let it just take my heart and soul out of teaching. So I would not be deterred. And I realized as I went through it and I learned more and I read more about teaching online, that to me, it all goes back to about teaching with your head and your heart. And it's a way to build community, which is the theme of this year's Ann Ferentz conference as well. And so and frankly, I actually surprised myself last semester. I can't say I like teaching online, but I thought that it went kind of okay. And I was able to build community with my students. I was able to get them to learn some things. Again, it was that heart and head combination. And so it got me to think about more about how to do that online. And so that's why I wanted to do this workshop. And again, but I also remembered, wait, it's actually in the context of the pandemic that we're having this conversation. So that's what how I want us to focus it, though I think the same principles apply of heart and head in the physical classroom as well. So in the interest of time, I have an example to give you, but I'm going to have to hold off on it because of the timing. But I just want to remind you, at least in terms of my opening comments, remember that saying that students may forget what you said, but they will remember how you make them feel. And so my experience is that if I make them feel good about the learning, they're going to do the work, right? If I give them interesting readings and important assignments and prompts, that's the head part. They'll do the work, but they're really going to do the work if I engage them, if I bring them along with the heart. And I don't want to say more about what that means because that's our first activity because we promised you an interactive workshop. So Lacey, take it away.
Thanks, Betsy. Just a reminder for those of you who just came in, you should be able to access the link for the breakout rooms, and we'll get you assigned to those so that we can move into them fairly efficiently. I just want to talk for 2 minutes about part of my interest in this workshop and then talk about the writing that you guys are going to do. So I'm doing a study on emotional labor and writing instruction in the disciplines, by which I mean, in our case, W2 courses, how faculty teach writing when they're not actually writing faculty per se. And one of the things that I'm finding is that faculty really consistently do deal with students on an emotional level, and not, often when we think about that in terms of if they need personal or psychological or care network support. And that's part of it. But really, what they're doing on a regular basis is they're interacting with students emotionally and working with their emotions as part of the teaching and learning. And they're doing this in quite, I think, deliberate ways. They really are concerned about how students feel in terms of their progress in their learning and how they can work with student emotions to better help them progress in their learning, which I'm finding really fascinating. So when Betsy invited me, to work with this, one of the reasons I was intrigued is I'm thinking now about how faculty can kind of harness that impulse in far more deliberate or intentional ways. I think they're doing it almost unconsciously, right? Just as part of the human interaction of teaching. But how can they use this impulse that they've been doing as part of very specific teaching strategies? And that's really what this workshop is about, is for you all to think about specific teaching strategies that direct and use those impulses we have towards human and humane interactions with our students in this, sometimes it feels like kind of inhuman, inhumane, sterile digital environment. How can we accomplish that now? Plus, with the burden students are feeling of being in a crisis era, right? That also, I think, is part of this. So all of that is to say, this is the context that we're working in. This is something we do, but how can we do it more effectively and deliberately in our teaching? So to start that discussion, what we'd like you to do is do a little bit of very quick writing. I'm going to give you just about 5 minutes. And what I'd like you to think about is, for you, what does it mean to teach with your head and your heart? 3 to 5 sentences, like really short. I am going to ask you to post it in the chat, but not yet. Don't post anything. Just write your quick thoughts about this. And when I give you the go, that's when you're going to post it. Okay, so take a few minutes. Quick thoughts. What does it mean to you to teach with your head and your heart? Few sentences, 5 minutes. Don't post it yet, please. How are we doing in terms of time? Some of you are kind of looking up at your cameras, which makes me think you might be done. This is how you read body language in a Zoom classroom. If you're done, could you just give a quick react with a thumbs up? I'm going to give you 1 or 2 more minutes, and then we will post them after that. Go ahead and wrap up whatever you're writing right now, whatever sentence you're on. Wrap up that sentence. So I had you hold off on posting, and this is something I might do with the class. And I know a number of you have probably done this before. So you're not just looking at other people's responses and kind of reacting to those. So you can just kind of have your own thoughts. So now I'm going to ask you, go ahead and post, put it in the chat, hit enter. Let's get them up there. So I'm saying words like flexibility, empathy, reaching out, seeing students as humans. That's always good. Looking for ways to engage them through things they might be familiar with, including lightening the material. So now that you've thought about this, we're going to come back to some of the points that you raised here in the chat. But now that you've thought about this a little bit, we're going to move to having you think more specifically about what to do with these thoughts in terms of your teaching. So Betsy, do you want to talk about moving everybody into breakout rooms?
Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Lacey and I are going to look at comments while you're in the breakout rooms. You have 20 minutes. We wish you had more. And the chat box from the main room will be visible to you in the breakout room. But whatever you write in the chat box during the small breakout rooms will not be available to the whole main room. So we want you to use a Google Doc. Every facilitator for each group has that Google Doc, but we thought we'd just, yeah. So I think, Lacey, I think we'll just leave it at that, right?
Yeah, facilitators, if you could, in your chat, could you please share the link to your Google Doc with your group in your chat? And if you're having difficulty with that, then flag one of us to help out with it,
All
okay?
right.
I think that's the easiest way to handle it.
Right. So use the Google Doc. And on that Google Doc, there are 3 categories, which is the approach or mindset or philosophy, the strategy, and then a name or contact person if any of us wants to talk to you. All of those links to a Google Doc, of those Google Docs, of all the different groups are going to be in one Google folder, and we're going to give you the link to that Google folder at the end of the workshop. And so that's the main way that we're going to be reporting back, given our short amount of time. Also in that Google folder, by the way, I've put a chapter by this book by Flower Darby, and it's fantastic, which is called Small Teaching Online. And she has a chapter in it, which is about building community. And the book is also available in our library as an ebook. So what do we mean by approach? Approach is some of the things that you mentioned about teaching with, like it's the philosophy or mindset. I think of, for example, empathy, like you said, would be an approach. And in other words, understanding the challenges that our students are facing, basically being online when they didn't sign up for it in the middle of a pandemic. So one strategy I learned from Flower Darby's book is something called an oops token. And she took it from somebody else. We all now can adopt it. It's language I put in my syllabus, which says, and this assumes obviously that I have a penalty for late assignments. And an oops token is one virtual chit the students can hand in at any time for any assignment and not be penalized for lateness in an assignment. So they get an extension, no questions asked. We don't have to do that whole bargaining thing and whether they're telling the truth or whatever. And then those students who don't use their oops token, they get 5 points added to their participation grade. So that was sort of an incentive. So again, empathy might be the approach and the oops token would be the strategy. So we would love for you to go to your breakout rooms now, unless anyone has any questions.
I'm going to open the rooms. If you don't get moved to a room, just put in the chat what room you want to go to. You may be able to move yourself if you've updated your Zoom app.
So you have till 4:10, and that gives us 10 minutes to, so we are on time, 10 minutes to actually then have a little close at any insights that you want to share. But we'll check in with the facilitators. So see you in 20 minutes.
Okay.
All right. Probably looks like we should have everybody back. In our last few minutes, since we don't have much time, we wanted to make sure, Betsy and I wanted to make sure to do a couple of things, and then we'll see if we have a couple minutes for comments or questions. So I looked through your chat responses while you were in the breakout rooms, and I was also dropping into your Google Docs to see what was on there. And so I wanted to highlight just a couple of things that I noticed that I thought were really interesting. In the chat, I think just this emphasis on humanity was just a huge part of it. This idea that students have lives outside of class, existences outside of our class, but also that we do too. And so there were a lot of comments about, revealing our passions, revealing our emotions, not only acknowledging students' lives outside of class, but actually finding ways to connect our courses and our course content to their existences outside of class, to really bring in our whole selves as much as possible into the teaching and learning. And I was really struck by that in the chat responses. And then too, the kind of, I think, more obvious thing of acknowledging where students might have constraints or difficulties in their lives outside of class and being empathetic with those, allowing empathy, flexibility. Those words showed up quite a bit. Along with empathy, there were people who remarked on the ability to use our relationships, the sort of social relationships we have with students, in order to better teach them, in order to help them learn. That isn't just there's material and we present it, but no, there's a social and human interaction going on there. And using that is part of this using our heart thing. A number of people pointed to moments of levity, of ways to lighten the material, to lighten the interactions, including ways that might be appropriate to the course content. And somebody noted, I really like this, noted pairing passion with compassion. And I thought that was a nice way of looking at this. We care deeply about the material. We want students to learn it. We want to teach it. And yet we also have to have compassion for all the complexities students might be bringing to that interaction and to what we are passionate about. And so I thought that was important. Interestingly, a lot of from the sort of head comments about this, content, expectations, policies, deadlines. To me, those are all things that when we think of what's a class, what is a class, it's those things, right? Here's the content, here are the policies, here are the deadlines, here are the assignments. And so I think if we open up our idea of a class beyond those sort of conventional tropes of a class to include more of this heart stuff, I think that would be really productive to actually bring that into our conception of what a class is in much more deliberate ways. In the Google Docs, these are going to be available to you, but again, I wanted to highlight a couple of points. Emphasis on low stakes assignments, I think is great, because we can keep grades out of the picture in those low stakes assignments. They give us a lot more freedom to engage in these more personal human interactions without grades kind of looming over it. A lot of strategies that had to do with transparency on our part and on students' part. And I felt implicit in there was the idea of vulnerability too, in a lot of those strategies. Communication, and not just email communication, showed up again and again. And throughout, what I saw in those Google Doc responses was a turn towards deliberate connections. So, and Flower Darby talks about this a lot in the book that Betsy mentioned. In a classroom, you can walk in and chat and pick up on the tone and interact with students, just casually. And it's very spontaneous. That doesn't happen as easily in the Zoom classroom, in the online environment. So those connections that we used to just make off the cuff, casually, we now have to deliberately seek them out and initiate them. Not just in the Zoom meeting, not just with the squares, but in a variety of other platforms and potential interactions too. And so I think this idea of deliberate outreach, deliberate connection, deliberate communication is a huge part of what's underlying this. So with all that said, let me paste this link once more. Here's the link for the Google folder. It has the Google Docs. It's got some other resources, including some resources about emotional labor. It's got the chapter that Betsy mentioned. Betsy, I think you said you saved the chat too. Are you going to post that in the Google folder?
Yes. So once the chat is all done, I will save it and I will post it. I will clean it up and then post it in the Google folder. What I would ask people is, I know that at least from one facilitator, let's give the facilitators a chance to sort of clean up their docs, their Google Docs. So before you go in and see what everybody's doing, maybe give yourself till tomorrow to take a look.
Great. Betsy, was there anything else you wanted to add, or do we want to take like 3 minutes if there are any questions or comments?
So you know me, I can always talk, but I would like to hear from other people and to ask if there's something that some burning desire, someone has something they want to share, if they want to put it in the chat box. If we could start with the facilitators, or any, is there something that you want to bring into the group? Just unmute yourself and speak.
Real quick, you guys, two things. I clicked on the document, Lacey, and I got the sign up again for the breakout rooms. I didn't actually get the folder. So that might be something I'm doing wrong, or I don't know if that happened to other people.
That happened to me too.
Okay, let me see if I can figure out how to get.
No, I got it.
Here.
I got it. No, sorry, but I was going to do that. So
Okay,
here
go
is
ahead.
here is the link to the Google folder. But again, give us time to everybody to.
Thank you.
Yeah, that looks like
And
the right
other
one.
thing is, I wanted to just say what a wonderful integrative way to finish my Ann Farron day, to be reminded that there's room for our passion in this two-dimensional setting, hell that we find ourselves in. Just a great topic, wonderful insights. I had the best small group moderator. Sorry, I have to say, Mary Switalski. Apologies to all of
Mary
you.
does rock. She does.
Yes, apologies to those of you who didn't have her. But I'm really looking forward to just keeping this as just like an operating principle to continue to try to honor our passions, our excitement in this world. It's really needed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Anybody
you,
else?
Mary. Thank you, Mary. I'm in the same group, and I really appreciated your role.
I also think it's important to realize there's things that are clearly better online than in person, that this isn't some sort of like, how do I survive it? Perhaps the flipped attitude is, how do I take advantage of this time? I find that the recording of lectures lets students who miss class watch the recording and then send an email, and there's no absence and they learned it. That's a benefit. sometimes an insight into students' life and what's behind me. Hey, what's that picture? You know, that's a benefit. The group stuff, much easier to do group work online than in a physical class, I find. So I think there's several things that are clearly superior online versus in-person traditional.
Yeah, let's not forget the opportunity for students to bring their pets to class, which is a key advantage of doing online teaching.
Absolutely, yes.
Anybody else, would they like to add comment? Pat, Pat after Heidi? You want to add anything?
I think Cindy just unmuted herself too.
Just
So Pat,
Cindy,
and then
unmute
Cindy.
yourself.
Okay, so I would just say the thread that kind of ran through all of our conversations, we had a whole bunch of great ideas, but the thread was really just to sort of keep this constant stream of back and forth communication so that you can talk to them, they can talk to you, you can share your ideas with them, they can share their ideas with you. That it's sort of like having that small percolating pass through is really sort of essential to keeping the constant engagement and keeping them emotionally involved in the course as well as intellectually involved in the course. So that was our big takeaway, I think.
Yeah. Pat, did you want to wrap us up with maybe our last comment?
Scott took some of the comment, but people had a wide variety of really great ways of making people feel seen and heard and present. And people talked about gamifying and icebreakers and being able to make sure that we recognize that we make mistakes and to treat mistakes as not only learning experiences, but community building experiences that we all, now that we all share. And to me, one of the big things about all of that was that none of this is particularly different from what we do in good teaching in a classroom. I happen to agree with Scott that for some kinds of teaching, this is actually a richer environment. I have had much better participation because the people who are quieter can use chat to respond to the people who always want to jump in first. And the people who really are quiet can use the discussion threads instead. And the fact that we've been thrown into this new environment makes everybody feel like they're really part of a community that's solving problems together. And to the extent that we lean into that, I think we create a better sense of community and a greater willingness to participate in solving it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point to end on, because really what we're talking about here is good teaching in general. I know for me, I'm sure this is true for many of you, this experience is actually going to make my teaching better in general. Not just a better online teacher, just a better teacher. And so I think if we keep that in mind too, that makes this experience much richer and more productive for all of us. So
I would agree with that. I would like two things. One is Eric, I think Christina, there's a evaluation. You're going to send a link out in the chat box.
Yeah, Eric just posted it right now.
All right. And
Yeah.
Christine Gettings, I'd like to hear the staff how to, I don't want to overlook our staff.
Oh, sure. I was going to actually interject in some way to make sure our voice was heard, but thank you, Betsy, for acknowledging us. I think one thing, we were talking about the demands we're all dealing with, but one thing that really stood out with for me was a colleague who said, we talked a lot about authenticity, right? And in a way to actually do that, the actual strategy to do that would be to say to your staff, or even to your students, it would work, or to your colleagues, I'm having a really bad day. I'm not really feeling myself today. So if things come off a little, awkward, or, I just want you to know that, because then creating that space allows the vulnerability on behalf of your students or your staff. For example, I sent my staff an email today saying, I'm having a really hard time with what happened on Wednesday. I had a lot of friends who were on the Hill. It's very personal for me. And I'm just having a really hard time with this. So I want you to know, if you need to take time for yourself, please do it. And I think putting yourself and then stepping out into that space of vulnerability really makes a big difference. And it helps to humanize all of us with our students, with one another. And in my own opinion, I try to think about the work of Brene Brown and how a lot of that is about sort of embodying that authenticity and having a sense of courage in doing so. So that was something that we talked about among many things, but that was the golden nugget, at least for me.
Thank you.
So I'm very conscious of time. My students taught me this. I would encourage everybody who's teaching to really stick to the time frames, and we are over time. So I encourage anyone who needs to leave, they should leave. I'm willing to stay as long as anyone wants to talk and chat on this topic. I want to thank everybody, and
Yes.
I want to wish everybody a really great semester.
Yes, thank you for bringing your ideas and energy at the end of the day. Yeah, have a wonderful
And I
semester.
want to put in another plug for humor and humanity. I think it's really, if not now, when? So anyone wants to stay on, feel free. I'm happy to chat.
I'm going to need to drop off because I actually have a not last minute. I have one of many spring major schedule changes that I have to take care of before our admin person leaves at 5 o'clock. So I need to go run do that. Thank you all. I really appreciate your time today.
All right. Thank you, Lacey. So feel free to unmute if anyone wants to add anything.
I thought this was great, Betsy. Thank you and Lacey for organizing it. I think it brought together some really interesting and diverse ideas too, which was, and also it's just nice to connect to people. So that's nice too.
Well, thank you. I mean, you noticed that half the time was spent in breakout rooms. So because I want you to know that 85 people signed up for this workshop and 44 showed up or something like that. So you can't have a conversation with that many people. And it's just a reminder for us as we teach or work with students.
Yeah, that said, the breakout rooms can be tricky if you have already organized your students into groups or teams. At least with Zoom, it's not like Blackboard where you can more easily have those pre-existing groups set up. So there's still these logistical things because Zoom is not meant for teaching, it's meant for meeting, that I have found interesting to try and figure workarounds. You can do
Christina will answer you.
Yeah, so Scott, I think you'll be happy to learn that Zoom made some changes over break. And you can now, as long as all of your students have updated their desktop Zoom client, you can actually turn on a feature that will allow them to self-select their breakout rooms. And co-hosts can now also manage breakout rooms. Although we did kind of run into a couple of issues with that today. But yeah, it was
yes,
really
no, that's good to hear about the co-host because usually you had to give that up, give up being a host. So here's a funny little thing. I know a student's going to ask, and I don't even know, how do you update your Zoom client or whatever you called it?
Yeah, so we had sent a link out to our team. I don't know if you got that reminder with CTRL.
I'll send you the link.
Yeah, well.
Or are you sending it now, Christine?
Is there any, Christina, is there any other hitch where they have to use an AU email and use the AU Zoom account? Because that's also been a wrinkle. Students sometimes are just, most of the time, using their Gmail, not their AU email.
I don't think so. We didn't get to try it this round, but we could turn it on and give it a try now if we wanted. But I think just any participant, like
right, as long as they're in the room.
Yeah, it's only for the pre-assigned that they need to have their Zoom account configured.
Thank you. That helps.
I think I see a lot of staff here. Is that correct?
We're all staff, Betsy.
No, I mean, so.
We're all staff.
Queen and Loretta, I don't know where you are.
Hello, I'm Loretta. Sorry about that. I was trying to get into the Google Doc. I was trying to ask a question earlier, but what I did, I just went through the chat box to see if there was a link to all the information that we discussed in the group section or the breakout sessions. So I do see that. That's why I was looking at that while you guys were talking. So, but no, I'm not staff. I am a professor. So
in what, Loretta, I don't know, what department are you in? SPA.
Okay.
And what do you teach?
Intro to Public Administration.
Excellent.
I just started there. So that's why, I'm like the hesitation. I'm like learning this process, the online teaching. And so, yeah, so this was great. I really enjoyed the presentations here. I had an opportunity to hear some ideas. So I do